Welcome to Off the Shelf, Conversations with Local Authors. I'm Martha Kofod, and our guest today is the Reverend Dr. Howard Roberts, an author and writer of several articles. Thank you for being with us, Howard.
It's a pleasure. Look forward to our conversation.
I'm going to begin by asking you a little bit about your background and how you got interested in writing.
Sure. Well, I'm a native of Kentucky, went to liberal arts college in Kentucky. Got interested in writing because it was required in college English, but had always had a dream of writing a book at some point, and my work as a minister had to write sermons on a regular basis, and that put me in the discipline of writing. And that's how I began to write, and then began to find themes that were consistent in some of the sermons and tried to begin to put things together in a thematic way for a book.
That makes sense. You mentioned that you were interested in writing even when you were a student in college, other than just what was required?
Well, primarily what was required, but had a lot of assignments that involved a great deal of writing, and so I had to learn how to put one word after the other. As a friend of mine said, there's not much to writing, it's just putting a word after another, and I said yes, but what's important is knowing which word goes after which word.
Right. And how did it all come together? What was your first book?
My first book was entitled Learning to Pray. I had a friend who had had a book published, and I asked him about that, and he told me about the editor that he had worked with. And I contacted that editor and with an idea. And the editor said that they weren't looking for books of sermons, that sermons didn't sell. And I told him I knew that on Sunday morning, that sermons didn't sell. But I came up with a theme about prayer, and he wanted me to do a book about how to pray, and I resisted that because I felt like that was suggesting you could measure it and sell it and all of that, and that really was a theme that we are continually learning how to do that. And he liked that, and I wrote a proposal with a couple of chapters and outline, and from that received a contract to write the book. That was 1983.
And how soon after that did you write another book?
I wrote another book in about a year and a half, 2 years later, with the same publisher, Broadman Press. And I'd always been interested in the life of Jesus, and began to look at that, and wondered why it was that certain phrases from Jesus' life, supposedly phrases, had been kept and used and emphasized, often referred to as the last words of Jesus. And so I came up with a theme of the lasting words of Jesus. Why have these particular statements continued to be important in the life of the church and life of individuals? So I developed several chapters and submitted that and received a contract for that book as well.
Were other members, earlier members of your family in the ministry?
Not anyone that I knew directly. I had a great-great-grandfather during the Civil War who was a minister, and I'd heard about him with folklore tales, but not in terms of knowing anyone in my family who had been a minister.
You wrote a biography of your grandfather.
Oh, it was my great-uncle, actually. He was county health physician in my home county in the late 1930s, but at the time that I knew him growing up, he was my family physician. He was always well respected in the community and highly thought of, and I was interested in telling his story and wanted to do that while he was still alive, or at least get information. So I proposed writing his book, his biography. He was at the time also president of a local bank, and I approached them about possibly helping to underwrite that as a tribute to him. And they eventually decided they wanted to do that and came back to me and made a proposal to help underwrite the cost of it, and then I did the research, and which included several conversations with him, as well as with people in the community who knew him. I had, in high school, I'd worked at the local radio station as a disc jockey, and so I went back to the manager of the radio station and asked him if I could put some ads on the radio to ask people to send me stories that they knew of Dr. Roberts, which they did. And then I contacted them and followed up conversations with them. My father also knew lots of people in the community who knew a lot about my great-uncle, and he was of great help to me of giving me names, and so I would contact those people and set up interviews. But the richest part was the conversations with my great uncle. Someone suggested that I go with him on house calls. He at the time was, that I was writing the biography, he was 87 years old. He was still making house calls. When
That's
I had
marvelous.
interviews with him, his answers were always very brief and to the point, and often one or two words was all the answer to my questions. But when we got in his Jeep to make house calls, when he turned on the ignition, he turned on his voice as well, and he talked nonstop. And as we would journey through the community and county, he would tell me about making a call at this house. I delivered a baby here. They didn't have any electricity in this house. It was middle of the night. So I pulled my Jeep up to the front door and turned on the headlights and had the woman to come into the front room so I could see what I was doing to deliver a baby. I drove here to this place and they met me with a horse, and I rode the horse over the mountain to make that house call. So he did that consistently and constantly, and I was writing as fast as I could, taking notes, as well as using a tape recorder, so that I captured that. And that's how I did most of the research and got a lot of the stories for that.
That's a remarkable story. He was born, as I recall, in 1903.
Yes.
So his life spanned a lot of technological developments.
Yes, that's correct.
So electricity was not common in that area.
That's right, nor automobiles, and so he went all the way from horse-drawn vehicle carriages and wagons and riding horses to automobiles, to trains and planes and space travel in his lifetime, as well as tremendous technological developments in the medical field, of course, which was his work.
Yeah. I was interested also in the background that you gave of the community in which he lived and the county.
Yes.
And so you must have done a lot of research with that. You didn't get that necessarily by word of mouth.
No, I didn't get all of that by word of mouth. I did a lot of research in that. It's also my home county, so I knew some of that from my own experience, but that was, of course, a brief period of time. I didn't have all the background. But I got that information from him and from other people in the community in terms of their experiences, as well as some reading about the county, learning the history. Yes.
Have you been interested in doing any other biographies of your family, yourself or your father?
I have not. My father died recently, and I have thought about trying to do something about his life because of his experiences as a business person, as a World War II veteran, and as a politician. He started out as a county court clerk and ended up as mayor of my hometown, and in between those bookends was working in business and a rural letter carrier and that kind of thing. So his life, it would be interesting to write about him, certainly. And
your own history? Do your children ask, or are they waiting until you do this?
Well, they ask, and they did one of our children did an excellent thing several years ago. She visited my parents several times and videotaped conversations and asked my parents to tell stories about their lives. And she has all of that on videotape and then transferred that to CDs and gave copies of that to each of her siblings and to us as gifts for Christmas a few years ago. So we do have quite a bit of oral history as a result of that I could draw from.
That's great. Now, you've written several books.
Yes.
As many as 9 or 10?
I have 12 total.
Are you currently writing a book?
I am not. I had an idea 3 or 4 years ago and sent it around a couple of places and didn't get a contract, so I haven't pursued it. Some people write a book, have the manuscript, and then seek to get it published. I'm not willing to work that hard. I prefer to write a chapter or two and outline the rest of the book and then seek a contract. And if I get a contract, then I'm willing to go ahead and write the book.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with the process. You don't have an agent then?
No, I do not. I've checked a couple of times for an agent, and that really hasn't worked out. The process that I've gone through is to find a variety of publishers and seek to learn what kind of materials they're looking for. And then once I've found a publisher or several publishers that seem to be interested in the kind of material I'm writing, then I approach them one at a time with a proposal, and wait until I hear from them, and then go to the next one. So I have a folder full of rejection notices.
With the obvious talent that you have, do you mentor other prospective authors?
I have not mentored other authors, although I've had conversations with several different people who are interested in writing. And so I've had 1 or 2 or 3 conversations with a person about how I've gone about doing it and what I've done to get things published. Mm-hmm. I am in a mentoring relationship with another minister at the time, currently, as a way of just talking about what life is like for a minister and the kinds of issues and those kind of things that go on. I think other professionals are doing similar things today in some areas, and I think that's very valuable. I did not have official mentors as I was growing up and as I was beginning my profession, but I've certainly had people who've been mentors to me. Certainly my great uncle was a mentor, just in the way he went about his work. One of the things I discovered in writing his book, his biography, is how similar his approach to his medical profession and my approach to ministry. Such similarities in the way we go about doing things. Mm-hmm. So I think he was a mentor indirectly in that way. But I've had other mentors, a couple of seminary professors that were a tremendous influence in my life. And since being out of formal education, a couple of minister friends have been exceptionally valuable to me.
Have you ever taught, either in...
Not extensively. I was a professor's assistant in college and in seminary, mm-hmm. and so I taught filling in for them occasionally, but I've never had an official teaching position for a semester or anything like that.
Well, just by your nature, you're a teacher
but I
all
am
the time.
A teacher, and my involvement in the congregation, there's certainly a significant teaching aspect to what I do. And leading seminars and classes for congregations. The
titles of your books are unique.
Well, good.
Are there any that you would like to mention?
Well, there are a couple that I think are fairly significant. One is called Faith and Ethics, Tough Questions for the 21st Century. Mm-hmm. That particular book deals with 10 ethical issues and that people are confronted with, and I wrestle with those and offer research on each of those topics with the idea that someone in reading that might choose one of those particular subjects they wanted to be involved in, mm-hmm. and give some resources that they could go to learn more information about that. And that book has been used in a couple of seminary classes and some other places as a textbook. Another one that I really like is one the title is U-Turns Permitted. Life is a journey that's as old as Hebrew Scripture and as old as the Jewish people being on a journey. The idea is probably popularized by John Bunyan and his book Pilgrim's Progress. Mm-hmm. But this is a book about life as a journey, and it's entitled U-Turns Permitted. And what I did was to use highway signs for chapter titles that I think help identify different points in our journey in life, and I hope the reader would find common ground with me in that and find those things to speak to their lives. Well, as an example, U-Turns Permitted is my favorite highway sign because there are lots of places where it says no U-turn.
Right.
So most of us have found ourselves going in the wrong direction at some point in time. And too many of us aren't willing to turn around. And so U-Turns Permitted, it's wonderful to recognize that you really can turn around and go the other way when you need to make those kinds of changes.
Changing your mind is okay.
It's okay, and really advisable lots of times.
Yeah. Do you have any concluding remarks you'd like to make?
It's gratifying to get your work in print. I enjoy seeing that and being able to hold in my hands what I've worked on, and to know that, and I get notes every once in a while from someone who's come across a copy of one of my books and made some comment about how it made a specific impact for them, or they learned something, or identified with me. So I find that very gratifying, and I find it very gratifying to have this conversation about this particular aspect of my life.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to have you as a guest on Off the Shelf, and we look forward to reading your books.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here and a joy to talk about writing.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on Off the Shelf, Conversations with Local Authors. Please join us again.